I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and what we're looking at today is the Bandai-Namco Flashback from At Games. Yes, I know, that At Games. The one that was so bad that Sega canceled their contract and decided to bring the Sega Genesis Mini / Mega Drive Mini in-house rather than let them make another crappy Genesis clone. But this was marked down significantly at Walmart, and I thought, being a fair man as I am, I will at least buy it at this reduced price, check it out, give it a chance. How bad could it really be? Well, you're going to get my unvarnished, unfiltered opinion right here on the channel, but first, let's unbox it and at least take a look at the contents and see what they pack inside of it. First, we've got this rather eggshell-looking container. No eggs in it, though. We have 2 stickers showing classic Pac-Man Ghost Monsters, so I guess that's at least something. And we've got this instruction manual. It's one of those fold-out map-style manuals. It's not a stapled manual you can flip through, but it is what it is. We've got the actual dongle that you use to run the games, the blast dongle, I guess. And you've got a controller here with 6 buttons, 3 control menu buttons, and a D-pad that is very wobbly. Can you see the pivot point on that? Can you see it underneath there? That does not feel good to use, and I haven't even played a game yet. They've also included the world's smallest USB power cord. Oh, you might have to provide your own if you've got to go any travel distance to actually plug power into this dongle, because you do have to power it, and you have to put batteries into the controller for the 2.4 gigahertz or so it's billed. We'll see if it's that good connection-wise, but that's what it promises on the box. Setting this thing up turned out to be a ridiculous pain in the tuchus, because the dongle is so big that I had to unplug multiple things behind my TV just to get it into one port. And then the USB cord would not draw enough power from the USB port on the back of my television. I actually had to unplug my Sega Genesis Mini power cord and run that over to the dongle for the Bandai Namco Blast. That was finally able to give it enough juice to get it working. But long story short, I unplugged about half of the things that were plugged into the back of my TV between HDMI ports and power cords. And by the time I was done with that, I didn't even know which HDMI port I had the damn dongle on anymore. Turns out it was HDMI 2, and it was already up and running when I switched over. So at least it works. We know that much. But let's get into some actual menu and see what it looks like from the start. Got a very tinny beep when you switch between one game and the next, and it's only got 6 of the games on the first screen, so you have to scroll to the right to see the next 2. Well, maybe we should just try a game and see how well this performs. Let's start with Galaga. It's one of my favorite arcade games. I've played many versions of it over the years. This one appears to be the NES version, which jibes with everything that I've heard about At Games, is that when they put arcade games on these things, they tend to use the NES versions. But I will say, at least it is working. I mean, I will give them some degree of credit for that, although it was way darker than I expected it to be. That I don't fault At Games for. That I think is my own settings. Somehow it went into energy saving mode when I unplugged and replugged in everything, so we'll at least give At Games the benefit of the doubt on that one. Now it's bright enough to play, but somehow it doesn't quite feel right. This is going to be difficult to articulate. I'll do my best, but if I was playing this on an actual NES, I think it would be a little more pixelish. It would be a little more blocky. Somehow it's like they applied a layer of filtering to it to soften the edges and make everything look more cartoonish. But in doing so, I feel like they actually robbed the style that the Galaga had on NES and made it weaker. So it's not the arcade version, and it's not the NES version. So you're kind of stuck in this no man's land where it's not really either one, which just makes me want to go over to my top loader NES that I had modded by Fix-It Phil and plug in my Galaga cart and play it there, because even though I'd be playing it on a CRT instead of an HDMI television, and even though it would be AV output instead of crystal clear HDMI video output, I almost feel like it would be a better experience. And it wouldn't be any less of a picture, because you can see we've got gigantic black areas on the left and the right. So it's not even using the full HDMI 16:9, which I guess you really wouldn't want it to in this case. But if I'm going to play 4:3, I'll just play 4:3 without the black bars on either side, if you know what I'm saying. So I can say this is a working version of Galaga. I can say it's playable. I can't say it's great, but there is a rewind function for what that's worth. You can go back about 7 seconds and redo something you did. And there are save states, so there are some features of this that aren't terrible. But now we're going to get into something that is terrible. First of all, this is not the arcade version of Pac-Mania, as you would have already guessed. But second of all, this, and I love Pac-Mania. This was one of the games that I hunted for in arcade after arcade just to play it, because I didn't have an NES. But if you were playing this on an actual NES, you would notice that it would look way better. You should be able to tell, even in this footage, even without directly capturing from the dongle, that there is noticeable shimmering every time you scroll up and down the maze. Look at any of these Lego blocks that Pac-Man is traveling around, and you will notice that they're wobbling and shimmering. It doesn't do that on a real NES. It doesn't do that when you play Pac-Mania on MAME, and it certainly doesn't do that in the arcade. And it's headache inducing. And I don't think there's any setting on my television that's going to fix this problem. It's going to be like this, probably not just for Pac-Mania, but for any game where you're scrolling through a maze. I'm going to see if I can finish at least one maze playing it this way, but I got to say that shimmering is driving me bats. It's making me want to use expletives, but at the same time, I know that's the kind of thing that gets your video less views and less hits and less clicks, because they've got an algorithm now that searches for people swearing in videos, and even if you bleep out your swears, it still figures out that you're swearing. So they've got a little too snippy with the censorship, and I just don't want to risk it. So I'm just going to finish this maze and bite my tongue, and then I'll use a save state and go back to the menu. Good job. Round cleared. Yeah, well, good job on clearing the maze, but not a good job on the emulation of the game. So let's see how the save function works. Overwrite state, I guess. There wasn't any state in there before. Now this makes me think there may be only one save state for all of the games and not one per game. But I don't know that for a fact. Let's try a single screen game now. Dig Dug might perform a little better. Again, the NES version, not the arcade version. You can tell right away by the fact that the title screen scrolled up. But yeah, this is a little better. With a single screen game, you don't get the shimmering like you get in Pac-Mania. So this, I would consider this mostly playable, except the pivot on that D-pad is just horrible because it's not flush with the controller and it actually sticks up a little and wobbles on top of its pivot access point. You're not really pressing a direction when you're pressing a direction. Again, that's not the easiest thing in the world to explain, but if the D-pad is like on the same level as the controller surface and you push it and you feel your finger or thumb or whatever pressing it against the surface of the controller, you know that you're pushing that direction. But when it sits above the controller and you push it, you don't feel it pushing your finger into the plastic. You feel it kind of wibble wobbling as you push. You don't know if you're pushing left, you don't know if you're pushing left and up or up. It's really, really bad. And I'm sure there would be a much better explanation of it on somebody's channel like Re-Res. Shane would talk about the dead spot in the center and the travel distance and all these precise measurements. And I'm not an expert on those things. I'm just telling you it doesn't feel great. And here we have the shimmering again with Xevious. It's not quite as obvious as it was on Pac-Mania, but I hope you take my word for it when I say I can feel it playing this. And here's something that really bothers me about this. I have a Jack-specific stick, one of the ones that was licensed by Namco back in the 2000s. I think it was the Ms. Pac-Man one, and it included Xevious, and it looked and played so much better back then than it does on this At-Games controller. I suppose it wasn't HDMI and it didn't have save states, but it just felt better to play. I just don't have any other way to describe it other than that. And Sky Kid, oof, the white balance catches up here. So it's washing out a little bit there at the start, but it's getting better. Yeah, there's some shimmer with the control here as well. And it looks and sounds mostly like the NES version. It doesn't have the cartoony roundness that Galaga did, but it also just, using this D-pad just makes me go, I want a real D-pad. If I want to play an NES game, I want an NES controller, and I want it on a CRT television, or at least I'd want it on something like the Analog NT, where if it was upscaled with the built-in firmware on the FPGA, it would look and feel much better than this. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and my recommendation is don't buy this product.